Today we're going to be painting fog. We're looking out at the salt marsh in Essex to a couple of boats that are sitting in a tidal pool. And while the photograph doesn't reveal a very foggy scene, we're going to interpret it this way. Also, we look at how to draw boats effectively, one of the more complicated shapes. Through here. Sort of counterproductive. Maybe I'll sign it here. It's not a bad idea to think about where you're going to sign your piece. Good, let's try a drill, and let's tape down a piece of scrap paper here. Just turn over any painting that didn't quite work out. We can use the back and get some value out of it. In this exercise, we're going to look at a way to render boats. It's a question I've been seeing from a lot of students. And the boat, just like a car, just like many things that are man-made, the boat is difficult to render because there's some very long curving lines to boats. We're going to look at a kind of plain boat, a dinghy, working boat, and at 3/4 view in the water. Of course, you can find all sorts of boats and all sorts of views of boats. 3/4 view is still one of the more interesting views. And let's think about a figure 8. I'm going to do it very lightly here. Figure 8, a lazy figure 8. Pressing harder. You say, what does that have to do with the boat? Nothing yet. Let's put on a line coming down like this. And this I'm seeing as the side of the boat. So it comes down to meet the water about here. So this is the front of the boat. Keel, I'm not sure. My nautical terminology is not what it should be. This is the front of the boat, and this is the bottom of the boat, sitting on the water, flat on the water. This is the other side of the boat. So this is what I mean by 3/4 view. We see a little bit of this side, a lot of this side. Look at how we create that beautiful line that we see in so many boats just by doing that figure 8. Okay, and it looks like a boat, right? We can take care of the line that we don't need over here. That goes out of view, and we have our somewhat an acceptable boat. Like I said, it's a simple boat, a dinghy. Nothing special here. And so let's do the reflection. Let's reflect this side here, and the kind of sweeping curve comes to meet that. We have a nice reflection of our boat, and that's going to be at the heart of what we're doing today, is this shape and its reflection. Okay. Let's try one more and see how flexible this is. Let's do a figure 8 that's a little more exaggerated, more of a classical figure 8. I don't know quite yet if this is going to work, but let's try it anyway and see if we can build a modified view of our boat. This one is facing the other direction. So this is a little more foreshortened, right? And we still have that beautiful curve that is so hard to get. It's really hard to get. If you find yourself struggling with boats, 9 times out of 10, that's the reason, is this curve. We can erase the lines that we don't need. This boat is also sitting on the water. We're about a little lower than eye level. Now we see we're about eye level. And let's draw the reflection of this boat as well. So we feel 2 different directions. One is coming towards us, one is going away. So that is a simple way to do a boat that may help you in doing your boats in the future. Say we have more of a flat back to this boat, a front that comes up, a back that is a little squared off. That's easy enough to add after creating the boat. We simply square off the back end. If this boat has a mast, we can do that with a straight line. Perhaps it has a boom that goes back as well. Oops. Some lines coming down for rigging. So it becomes a sailboat of sorts. Anyway, you see the potential, I think, of using this simple shape for your boats. Now, as I said, there's many different views of boats. Sometimes we see them from above. Sometimes we see them going straight across our plane of view, in which case it's a different shape altogether. And this figure 8 is not as useful. This is useful for this 3/4 view of a boat. So let's just paint these. Since we're mixing our grays today, we might as well continue that idea in painting these boats. Put a little water here. Don't need much. I just want to do some idea of the reflections. How can we paint the reflections? We have a couple ways available to us. Let's mix some yellow ochre and some burnt sienna. And below we'll put some ultramarine blue. Our primaries, basically. All right, and we'll mix them on the palette. Let's make kind of a mid-strength gray. Mix them over here. Some burnt sienna. Some ultramarine blue. A little bit of the yellow ochre. And we make a gray out of this. It'll probably be a warm gray. A mid-strength gray. Let's start to build this boat following that line. And I'm going to leave just a little bit of white at the edge. That's a kind of a defining point, is that edge of the boat. Bottom is another defining point. So let's go into the interior and paint this back part of the boat. That, you see how that edge functions. Typically on boats we see wear or rust or discoloration, especially working boats that have been around for a while. So let's put that into our boat right along the bottom. Some much thicker paint. Paint it into this wet area. Right through here. And now let's add the reflection. The reflection we're going to, in this case, is going to be a hard-edged reflection. Same colors. That reflection is going to be a little darker. Going to have some little bit of broken edge to the reflection. Give it a feel of the water it's sitting on. So the shape is basically the same, but we look at the edges of the reflection and notice that there's some ripples. I'm going to put that strong edge in there also. Like that. And so our boat sits nicely on the water. One way to paint a reflection just going to blend that in a little bit more. Oops. Now let's paint the next boat. Why not? We'll give this boat a little bit of a warmer gray. Experiment with our palette using burnt sienna, yellow ochre, a little bit of the ultramarine blue, warmer gray. When you can see that line, it's much easier to paint it. I don't know why I left this stripe here, but I did. I'm going to leave it. And we'll add, a little bit of discoloration to the bottom, just like we did in our first boat. Right through the bottom. It could be a painted area too. Very often these are painted. There's usually a board or connecting point up here. Make that come forward. And we'll put a little extra dark inside here. Now that's a boat. I would get on that boat with no worries. feel it would probably carry me away. We'll go a little lighter in this reflection. Again, sort of a broken reflection. That's too light. Maybe a little more blue in that reflection. This is a variable, really, how you determine the color. You can really paint anything and have it work. I always think about variety. I think you know that about me by now. Variety, the importance of variety. So I'm giving this boat a bit of a wake, as though it's, you know, propelling forward. So the wake kind of comes off here. And we feel it's moving a little more, perhaps. I'm going to give it a little darkness where it meets the water, especially through here. Let that bleed into the surrounding color. Let's do the mast above. Simple stroke. This and the rigging or the sail that's gathered. Then, can I introduce you to a specialty brush? The specialty brush that I'm showing you is called a rigger. And some of you have one, I'm sure. Some of you don't. It's not a necessity, but we're always curious about materials. So there's a couple different types of riggers. I have two. And this is one. You can see if I hold it next to the paper how there's a very big belly, but yet there's a very fine, delicate tip at the end. So what this does is hold a lot of liquid in the belly, gives you more paint to work with when you're drawing your lines. This is more of a standard rigger with, you can see, very long bristles. And it's great for making lines, but it does not hold a lot of liquid, so this is good for shorter lines like we're using in this example. So, you know, the rigger is great for making those long, skinny lines that you see in boats. And I think it's derived from, it was designed for just such a use. That's why it's called a rigger. So let's reflect our mast, and we can have fun with this because we make the line come down and squiggle. It breaks and squiggles again. This shows us that we're on water with a little bit of movement. And if the water is highly reflective, we can do the same with our rigging. You know, little lines like this suggest that it's a reflection, but it's on a watery surface. So this is another way or another thought when painting reflections, is using that wavy line to suggest that the water is calm and highly reflective, but that there's some disturbance there too, with the wake as well, meaning the boat is coming forward. All right, some thoughts on painting boats. I'm curious to experiment with this one. It's still a little wet, but I think I'm going to try it anyway. What I want to do is, well, let's put some, maybe we can put some boards. You know, if it's a wooden boat, we're going to see boards that kind of parallel the shape. If you look at fishing villages in Europe or in eastern Massachusetts, a lot of these types of boats used to go out short distances and very practical. These are working boats. Okay, 2 boats floating, good. Let's try just a little experiment. If we want to soften a reflection, we can do that just using water. So let's come straight down here, just using water, and soften that reflection. And that, you know, the water has perhaps a gradient. I don't think it improves it, but it shows you some ways to think about reflections. So harder edges above, softer edges below that we can affect later in the stage of the painting. This is what I have to show you about boats. It's not so much, but I think you'll find it practical. Let's move on to our painting. Okay, let's do the drawing first. Composition is, I'm using a square sheet here again, and I just find that it a little peeling in this case, that I have to think a little bit more about the division of the piece and how I'm going to place the subject in an interesting fashion. Sometimes when we're working with a more traditional landscape mode, it kind of forces us into a way of setting up the subject that can be good, but sometimes I prefer to think about it from the beginning and design with a little more intent. This is some distant reeds here. Let's place our boats rather high in the water. There's that figure 8. Let's see if it helps me out with this pinky schooner. This is the pinky schooner, which has a more rounded body, a more elevated prow or aft. I'm not sure. Aft is in the back, I think. And sort of an extension that was practical. I'm sure someone can explain, someone with nautical knowledge can explain the practical value of this. I think it was when they were fishing cod, it had some practical value for them. Okay, there we go. Close enough. Let's put the second boat behind it, a little smaller. This one, we just see the peak of the boat, hardly, well, practically nothing further back. flat on the water. Again, that inward movement on the side. I think mine is a little big. I'm going to make it smaller. That looks a little better. And the mast going up at a little bit of an angle. That angle is reversed. Coming down, it's not too much of an angle. A slight angle, not so extreme. Going down about like that. And there is another piece coming up like this, also reflected. Coming out like this, reflection here, like that. And this one coming down and very long, kind of a convex shape, hidden by some grasses, but we can approximate. Beautiful shapes, beautiful shapes. Meeting the grass. There is some grass here. How much of that I'm going to put, I'm not sure. Then more grass on this side, but somewhat in the distance. Still an interesting shape that's reflected. And a small boat, not a small boat, but it's a little further in the distance over here, kind of tilting into the shoreline with its own mast coming up. And we can reflect that as well, coming down. Shapes of grass. This is going to be somewhat of a beautiful reflection. Coming down like that. Some grass coming out. And then some grasses kind of falling across the frontier. We'll deal with that later. In the background. Background is very complex, my gosh. Just so much stuff. We'll draw some treetops. More treetops. The pier. The second pier. Maybe some other masts back here to make it feel more interesting. Some of that's reflected. That's about all we'll do though. This is not only a background, but it's a very foggy day. And so, you know, less is going to be more in this case. Some bollocks or posts that are used to tie off our boats. This has a nice distinctive mark coming across the front. I think this is about all we need for the drawing. A lot is going to be communicated by the boat's shapes and reflections, the graded washes that we apply.
etc. Still feels a little big to me, but I can make it smaller. Slightly smaller. That's perhaps a little better. And I'm looking at this boat over here. And that's kind of framing our scene, in truth. We'll do some long reflections of those grasses. So I see this as 1, 2, 3, 4 stages. The tone in the sky, the tone in the background, the tone through the midground, and the tone in the foreground. My focal point, kind of right through here, coming down. I'm going to use a graded wash that starts back here and gets darker, all the way to the bottom. This is going to be painted as one shape, the background. Second shape, are we going to see that reflected back here? A little bit. I'm talking about the workshop of the boatsmith that works in this area. Mr. Barnum, who's responsible for repairing these boats and many of the commercial or let's say restored boats that we see in Gloucester Harbor are works of his. Okay, lighten those lines. This is what we need to get started. Let's move on. We're ready to go. And I'm going to start by doing a light application to the sky, down to the water level, and very light. Then begin this large graded wash below that comes all the way down to the bottom. Those are 2 big washes I'd like to accomplish right away. So a little bit of color. I have some leftovers here. I might just use dirty water. It all depends what color. I want a cooler temperature in the back, so predominantly yellow ochre. Let's bring that in, just water. Dirty water has a little bit of the gray that I'm using, but I want to bring it right down to this edge here and kind of flatten it out. And maybe add a little bit of color through here. So it feels like it's luminous up atop, a little dark below. Easy, easy, easy. Okay, so we start again. just below that water level, straight across. I'm using as clean a water as I have. I hope this really dissolves into almost nothing. Just a little bit of light back there. Very light through my center of interest, right through here. Through the boat. A little bit of warmth in the water. A little bit more warmth through the water. Bring it down. How quickly we can cover with this big brush. And at this point I want to get, I'm going to join these. I don't like that strong edge there. I like that better. I'm going to place some darker stuff in the water, of a bluish nature, with grayed with a little bit of burnt sienna. Let's see how that looks. Let's go a little darker. More blue. Has to be well mixed because this color is very fresh. So if you get the glob on your brush, it could be not good. Again, I don't want it to be too much of a pretty blue, so I'm graying it with burnt sienna here. But I want the temperature to be cool. Very cool. So that means I keep looking at it and seeing about the overall temperature. I'm also looking for consistency. Almost there. Good. Let's do another. That's a little closer in value. Let's carry this down. Right. And let's go a little darker into that. We kind of have to do more than we think here. I've learned this through many bitter experiences. More. A little bit of yellow ochre. Just a little. And then a little more blue through here. Some ripples. And finally, quite strong, but remember we're painting into a wet area. My brush has a lot of moisture on it. That's something I have to be mindful of. I want the big stroke through here, right? But I don't want it to fade away too much. It's looking good. If it looks good when it's very wet, it's going to dry pale, I'm afraid. One more. Can't go much more than this. One more. Whoosh, and whoosh, and whoosh. My Why not another whoosh? Slightly indicating sort of rocking quality. Okay. Take a breather. Put some softer waves up above the little water. Just dilute it a little bit. All right, let's hope. So I'm going to dry it off. Do I need to? Yeah, it's still a little damp up here. Let's take a break and dry our painting. All right, stage 2, we're going to paint the background. I'm going to paint it as flat as possible. And I have a little white here. I'm just kind of mixing that in with my mixture. It makes the color a little thicker, and of course it makes it a little more opaque. This color, naturally a cool gray. Let's start. Using same palette, basically, same 3 colors. Maybe we have a mast in the distance. Just a little lighter. And there's just so much going on back here in terms of rooftops, and I'm basically not even going to paint those. I'm just interested in this shape, the overall shape. And it's being reflected in the water, right? A little bit. Let's continue that over. Even though it's a flat shape, we want it to be interesting. So some ins and outs. These are distant trees. More masts. Suggesting boats. Up here. Just that. That's it. I'm going to paint a little bit of that below as well. Kind of casting some reflections. but a very flat shape. Most of this painting is going to be made up of flat shapes. Okay, so the hue on the right is a little better. I'm going to just lighten this by lifting a little bit of color out. Let's go to the midground shapes of the land coming down here. We'll start on the left side. I'm looking for a little bigger brush. Here it is. I'm going to mix a little more burnt sienna with this. Ultramarine blue. I'm looking for a certain consistency. Burnt sienna, a little bit of yellow ochre. And I want to paint this shape, avoiding the boat, going from a little darker aspect on top. Yes. To a lighter aspect below. A graded wash, if you will. I like graded washes. I use them whenever I can. Okay, so we do this is the workshop of Burnham's workshop. Mr. Burnham's workshop. Coming down to the grass. Just a little darker up above. As it comes down, getting a little lighter and cooler. So I'm using a little more ultramarine blue and a little extra water. And I'm taking care of, got to avoid my boat here. Because I want to preserve that white edge. Some pier or bullocks. A little more water, a little more yellow ochre. As we come down to this grassy area here. This is the shoreline. We can be a little more artistic. There's always stuff piled here, so really anything we want to do is okay. And I'm going to go ahead and create some reflections of the grass in the water. So a little darker up here, right? Not strong dark, just a little darker. A little piece of that roof. Paling out as it comes down. Back of the boat. Maybe a stronger piece here. Let's do the same over here. That's dried. Same colors, a little more yellow ochre and blue to suggest, barely suggest green. Yellow ochre, ultramarine blue. They're not a recipe really for green, but I think the slight variation will be more noticeable since we're working with so many grays. Of course, we build in some grassy stuff here. Pushing back all of that stuff. There's the boat. And we bring that down into the water and reflect it. I'm going to put just a little more blue into that. Here we can play with the reflections a little bit. Just going to leave a suggestion of that boat there for the moment. Now let's go to our main boats, or the boat known as the main. These are in the distance. I don't need them to get too high. Let's create a little graded wash there too. So graded washes are useful. In this case, we go a little darker at the top. Let them be light or luminous through the body, and maybe a little darker at the bottom as well, through the grasses themselves in the reflection. And a little luminous through the middle. That means a little lighter through the middle. These are getting a little long. All right, I think that's enough. Let's put our main boats in. We're going to do a graded wash there also. I'm going to start with burnt sienna, mix up a little darker gray. So by working with these colors, I can get pretty dark, but not really black, and I don't want that on a foggy day. Okay, keep it wet. And we built in the reflection. Burnt sienna, a little more ultramarine blue. Pretty dark stuff. Okay, so let's keep that wet. And some little ripples here. We can lift some out of there too to get a more wavy effect. But I want to get a couple things. I want to get that graded wash going. So a little darker up above, putting some strong burnt sienna. Blending it into the color below. bring some of that color to the bottom of the boat. So my strongest hues on the bottom of the boat, I'm using ultramarine blue, burnt sienna pretty strongly to the bottom. And it's going to feed into the graded wash of the reflection as well. Let's keep that moving. Okay, is it moving? It's kind of moving. Can we lift a line for ripple? Ripple in the water. Yes. Good. Zap it once more. Trying to achieve some of those graded washes. And maybe we get just a little darker in the tip of this wash. Like that. Okay. Let's paint that middle boat. Same sequence. A little bit of burnt sienna to my gray. The boat starts here. And I want to, keep it nice and flat through here. And I'm wondering how to grade this, possibly similar fashion. Just take a little burnt sienna. This is all imagination, really. I don't even look at the image at this point, but I am thinking about variety, gradation, and kind of flat shapes against this. Right, I think that's good. Let's paint the reflection. Some feeling of waves, or ripples, not waves, right? Just a little bit. Then let's go to a small brush, smaller brush, to paint that mast. I want to paint it now, I guess, because it's wet in the reflection, and I want to just have it be an extension of that. We can paint the upper mast a little later. A little bit of burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, some yellow ochre. And that mast is going to be about here. So we started about here. A nice positive brush stroke. And that one that follows it through here. Some of the rigging. Give us that nice quiet harbor feel. I'm going to bring in a few grasses from the left-hand side, kind of coming in here. Darker, so we go burnt sienna, a lot of ultramarine blue, a little bit of yellow ochre, give us a sort of greenish, gray-greenish type of hue. Let's add a little of that color to this forward reflection. Yeah, some grasses kind of growing up. Through here. Really designing this based on how I think it's going to look good. Those we can make wavy too. Reflections, I mean. Seagrass, I don't know what it is. Something. plenty of that stuff around. As well as I want to put a few darker pieces. Let me stay with this color for the moment because there's some really interesting grass here. A chance for calligraphy, a chance to push everything back a little bit into that background. Kind of a misty feeling. I'm going to leave it pretty much untouched through the corner here. Even though there's a lot of, in our image, there's a lot of stuff. I think it's too much and it's sort of counterproductive. Maybe I'll sign it here. It's not a bad idea to think about where you're going to sign your piece. And I will bring some grasses up from the corner a little bit. Spending a lot of time there. I don't know why. Something I really like about this environment is when it's very reflective, it just seems like glass that we're looking at. So it's fun to play with that and do something, you know, a little unique. Okay. Almost there. Let's do the mast of our boat. It's dry above. We can do that and some rigging. Make it a slightly warmer hue. white there. Give it some opacity. And I want it to be a nice stroke, so take out a lot of the pigment. Good enough. Let's do another one here. Kind of dry brush, right? Right off the paper, pushing everything in the background further back. Let's just make the boat that's tilting slightly darker. We don't have to do much with that. Yeah, kind of a unnecessary, but a little interesting. What you can do with 3 colors, huh? Not too bad. Let's put a little extra color into some of these foreground grasses. Adding a bit of burnt sienna, especially to where they meet the water. Now, does it need some grass on the left side? That's the question. Or do we just let it be reflections? Maybe just reflections, huh? A little bit of grass, perhaps, but not as much as is in the image. Feel it's a little too bright there. I want to put some blue in. But I'm going to wait to do that until the painting dries. Yeah, this grass seems unnecessary. On the left side, I mean. Well, my gradient paled. I wish it was a little darker through the bottom. Maybe I can do that at the end too. So to finish up, you know, the whites that are here are perhaps a little bright. Let's just knock it back a little. We can go darker on the interior. And I'll lift a little bit behind this boat. Make it a little brighter back there. But I think this is pretty much it. Put the signature here. Yeah, fussing. Let me let it dry before I do that.